Hello students. Today we will talk about the causes and consequences of early Turkish invasions into India. And we will focus on Mahmud of Ghazni and Shahab-ud-Din of Ghur, who is also known as Muizzuddin Muhammad of Ghur. Now Mahmud ascended the throne of Ghazni in 997 after the death of his father Sabukti-Din. He initiated a policy of penetrating the east and began his raids into India around 1000 CE. This move has been regarded as central to the foundation of Muslim rule in India by medieval historians. Even though Mahmud had only a transitory agenda in India, he is credited by medieval scholars as paving the way for Muslim dynasties in the Indian landscape. Now, who exactly was Mahmud of Ghazni, and what was it that persuaded him to come to India? Now, around the 8th century, when the Arabs had conquered Sindh, the Umayyad dynasty had sent forces towards Transoxiana, which was then inhabited by heathen Turks who had come there from Central Asia. Many Sufi mystics played a very important role in spreading the word of the Prophet in this region. And the inhabitants here steadily adopted Islam. But the Turkish tribes were not all Islamized at the same time. Therefore, these non-Islamized Turkish tribes continued to remain a challenge to the Abbasid dynasty. However, with time, the Islamized Turks became a pillar of support to the Abbasid Empire. They contributed vast amounts of revenue, they acted as palace guards and commanders, and also helped to convert the non-Islamized Turks to Islam. Thus, we find the Turks gradually used their skill as horsemen and warriors very well, and this was of great help to the Abbasid Empire. And soon the importance in this region of the Iranians and the Arabs diminished completely. Now, the gradual weakening of the Abbasids around the 9th century generated an atmosphere of military power play in the region. In the eastern part of Iran, a new dynasty called the Samanid dynasty established control over Khorasan and Transoxiana. In the second half of the 10th century, Alaptigin, a Turkish slave and a recalcitrant governor of Khorasan, defeated the Samanid dynasty and carved out a small kingdom on the margins of the Samanid kingdom. Right? This area was actually snatched from the Hindu Shahis, a branch of the Hindu Shahis. The Hindu Shahis were rulers of parts of Kashmir and the area right up till the river Chenab. After the death of Alaptigin in 963, his slave and son-in-law Sabuktigin seized power. It was imperative for Sabuktigin to expand his area of domination, and he inevitably clashed with the Hindu Shahi king Jaipala. This was around 990-991. Jaipala retracted on his pledge to pay indemnity. In fact, in alliance with the ousted governor of Ghazni and with some of the chiefs around Multan, Jaipala had the temerity to attack Ghazni. He was, however, decisively put down. Sabuktigin died in 997, and this paved the way for his elder son Mahmud to ascend the throne of Ghazni. Now, what exactly was it that enabled Islam to spread so rapidly from the Arabian landmass towards the vicinity of India? Andre Wink posits the notion of a new integrative force of Islam. He says that this was the key factor behind the success of the Arabs. He brushes aside theories of technological superiority and better horsemanship. Instead, he concedes that the Arabs were infused with an elemental energy, and that is what made them so successful as conquerors and intruders. Marshall Hodgson feels that it was homogeneity and expansive vitality which Islam displayed at this time that enabled it to overcome the pastoral Bedouin tribal culture of the central, northern, and western Arabian Peninsula. Richard Eaton tells us that the Prophet's ideal of attaining socio-economic parity among all followers pushed the desire for conquest further. Now, Mahmud rapidly became a force to be reckoned with. He defeated the Samanids and consolidated his position in Khorasan, Khwarizm, Sistan, and Ghur. The magnitude of his command is testified by the fact that he was the first ruler to flaunt the title of Sultan, and he received a robe of honor from the Caliph. The story of his eastward campaigns really begins with his encounter with Jaipala near Peshawar in 1001. Right? The Hindu Shahis were in possession of Peshawar and Punjab. Jaipala's defeat was later on followed by the defeat of his son Anandapal near the Hindu Shahi capital Vaihind in 1009. However, the Hindu Shahis continued to offer stiff resistance. Anandapal made efforts to ally with the Ismailis and obstruct Mahmud's passage towards Multan and his attempts to penetrate the Punjab. Mahmud, however, overcame Bhatinda, Multan, and the fort of Nagarkot. When Mahmud temporarily returned to Ghazni, Anandapal proved resilient and reinstalled himself in the northern part of the Salt Range. He made Nandana his capital. Later, however, Mahmud appeared near Lahore, dismissed Anandapal in 1015 and occupied the territory right up till the river Jhelum. Incursions into Punjab and eastern Rajasthan paved the way towards the Gangetic Doab. After this, Thaneshwar was attacked. Here, an important motive of Mahmud of Ghazni was adding special elephants to his army, which were very expensive at that time. After Thaneshwar, eastern Delhi, Baran, Mathura, and Kannauj were also overpowered by Mahmud of Ghazni. Kalinjar in Bundelkhand was invaded next. Mahmud then desecrated the temples at Nagarkot, Thaneshwar, Mathura, and Kannauj, right? And needless to say, enormous booty fell into his hands. Now, Mahmud's drive to enhance his booty naturally propelled him towards Somnath, right? So this motive of looting and collecting greater riches actually steered Mahmud towards Somnath. Somnath was a very famous temple and also at the same time a very busy port. Romila Thapar writes that it is agreed that Mahmud deliberately wanted to project himself as a destroyer of idols to earn legitimacy within Islam. And in doing so, he not only targeted Hindu idols, but there is also an instance of his intention to demolish a pre-Islamic idol at Mannat, the goddess of destiny, venerated by the early Islamic people. Muhammad Habib comments that Mahmud was a political realist who did not have simply religious aspirations. He was a self-aggrandizing general who fought with the Hindus and the Muslims for the sake of territorial expansion. The temple of Somnath declined due to continuous attack by the Muslims. Added to this was the weakening of commercial activity around it. Nevertheless, we find that Somnath showed surprising resilience and revived with time. Its recovery has often been linked with the upward curve of trade around this temple. Now let us look at the causes and motives of Mahmud of Ghazni. Where Mahmud's motives were concerned, it must be understood that the Ghaznavid Empire, made up of Afghanistan, northern Persia, and Khorasan, suffered from the paucity of resources. In his analysis of Mahmud's invasions, Muhammad Habib draws attention to the secular or baser motives which were at play in Mahmud of Ghazni's mind. Here, his main instinct was tapping the enormous resources of India. And we all know that the Hindu temples in particular were repositories of great wealth, and this was a very important driving force behind the adventures of Mahmud of Ghazni. Romila Thapar tells us that Ghazni's economy had two separate segments. The major thrust was in pastoral pursuits. But at the same time, intense commercial exchange also existed in the towns of Persia, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. However, Mahmud still had to depend upon raiding of territories as a permanent means of self-enhancement. He focused on pillaging the urban treasuries and taking in prisoners who could then be sold as slaves or inducted into the army. Utilizing technological improvements like the superior harness and saddle, Mahmud's skill at leading fast-moving bands riding the best horses was undeniable. He also used to his advantage the service of mercenary soldiers who were infused with the Ghazi spirit. These Ghazis combined religious zeal with a desire for war and plunder, and these soldiers were prepared to martyr themselves for the cause. So, this entire episode was a political stepping stone into the Indian subcontinent. Now, Mahmud had some political and administrative control over Punjab and Multan. Right here, the Indian chiefs or Thakurs were compelled to pay tribute. Some were used as intermediaries, while the existing land system was generally left unchanged. We find that coins were issued during this period bearing both Arab and colloquial Sanskrit inscriptions. This reveals that Mahmud was a pragmatic ruler, eager to participate in the economic activity in the region, and ensured that these coins had acceptance as the medium of exchange. The wealth amassed from India enabled Mahmud to maintain an army in Ghazni and the mercenary troops, some of whom were Indians and Hindus. Now, Mahmud of Ghazni was very interested in culture. So we find that he had other priorities as well. He attempted to build up a particular culture at the court, which was distinct from that which prevailed in Baghdad. Scholars from all over were lured by a combination of wealth and force. Persian libraries were ransacked and Persian culture superimposed within the precincts of his court. Ansuri, poet laureate, oversaw the literary activities within the domain of the court. Qasidas were composed by the likes of Ghazari Razi and Faruqi. Al-Biruni and Firdausi of the Shahnama fame were some of the luminaries who found a place there. Mahmud initiated a Persian Renaissance from above. The Persian language found a greater acceptance among the Turks. Mahmud's propensity towards aestheticism ushered in an era of cultural effervescence amid bloodthirsty battles for power and domination. The accumulated riches were also used to beautify the city of Ghazni and improve facilities like irrigation. So he had a particular agenda in Ghazni too. Thus, Mahmud of Ghazni was not just a plunderer. His image as a ruthless martial leader is softened somewhat when his patronage of Persian culture and his aspirations in the economic sphere are taken into consideration. Having cleared the route from Central Asia to India, Mahmud died in 1030. Let us look at the Turkish presence. So we will talk about Muhammad of Ghur, the impact and the new beginnings. So we are now at a point when, after a hiatus of 150 years, Turkish rule is set to begin in India. Contact between Ghur and the Indic space continued, sometimes in the form of raids and sometimes apolitically. It culminated in the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate by 1210. In the course of his campaigns, Shihab-ud-Din or Muizzuddin Muhammad of Ghur made the first inroads into India. This set in motion a series of events which helped the Turkish conquerors occupy and control the Indo-Gangetic plain. So, we find this onslaught changed the dynamics of power and impacted political formations in northern India. This was epitomized in the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate. Existing roughly for about 200 years, from 1200 to 1400, the Sultanate reshaped economic, social, cultural, and demographic components in the Indian landmass. Now let us look at the backdrop. The process of establishing control over unfamiliar political terrain, which was northern India, was a complex one and succeeded only after intense competition between the Islamic Turks and the contenders and other contenders to power in northern India. The Turks were able to capitalize on the fact that the political structure in northern India was quite fluid and there was no vast empire to negotiate with. The tripartite struggle between the Palas, Pratiharas, and Rashtrakutas had exhausted all three, and the age of small regional kingdoms had been inaugurated. This enabled the Shanshabani dynasty of Ghur overrun the Rajput Brahmin combine and carve out just another such kingdom for themselves. It was by slow, measured steps that the kingdom subsequently transformed itself into an empire. As a consequence, the identity of the Delhi Sultanate was ensured. Let us look at the expeditions of Muhammad of Ghur. Muhammad of Ghur's initial aggression against India was the capture of Multan in 1175, which was then under the Karamatis, who adhered to a religion which was actually a blend of Islam and Buddhism. Muizuddin then proceeded towards Uch and made his way to Neherwala in Gujarat. There, he was absolutely routed by the ruler of Gujarat in a battle near Mount Abu. At this time, however, the very young Prince Prithviraj Chauhan did little to help the Chalukya kingdom at this point. Now, adjusting his plan of action, Muizuddin conquered Peshawar from the Ghaznavids in 1179-80 and then Lahore in 1181. He revved up his control over the Punjab and strengthened his hold over Sindh. He was now fully prepared for conflict with the Rajputs. After this, Muizuddin attempted to capture the fort of Tarbhinda, which was important for the defense of Delhi. Prithviraj Chauhan reacted by approaching Tarbhinda and defeating the Turks completely. The beleaguered Ghurians somehow managed to save their commander Muizuddin. Prithviraj, who completely misjudged the situation, desisted from further pressurizing the Turks. This Chauhan ruler perhaps took this episode to be a frontier fight and did not really gauge its long-term impact. The second battle of Taurain in 1192 was a major game changer. Muizuddin planned it carefully and it paid dividends. His triumph in this battle was a watershed moment in the history of the times. So the spree of conquests continued. We find that Muhammad of Ghur then brought the Sivalik area, that is Ajmer, Hissa, Sirsa, under his sway and placed Qutubuddin Aibak, his general, in charge. He then returned to Ghazni. Aibak very soon removed the Tumara chief from Delhi and made it his base of operations. Muizuddin returned to India in 1194. With the help of his general Qutubuddin, he subjugated Meerut, Baran, Koil near Aligarh. He then steered his troops to victory against the Gahadawalas, who were the next most important power in northern India at this time, in northwestern India during this period, at the Battle of Chandawar in 1194. He then marched towards Benares and then took over Kannauj and Ajmer. Subsequently, there were uprisings in Kol and Ajmer. Right? These were quelled, and the Chalukya ruler of Anhilwara, who had made a common cause with Ajmer, was then put down. Annexation of Anhilwara, however, took place only in 1240. Badaun was next seized in 1197-98 from the Rashtrakutas. Malwa was raided, and the Chandela capital Kalinjar was assaulted in 1202-3. Mahoba and Khajuraho were also crushed emphatically. Now let us look at the impact of Ghuride rule. Now the establishment of Ghuride rule, which we find took place properly from 1210 really, with the accession of Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, was actually a major break with the past in terms of religious beliefs as well as administrative and economic organization. Once entrenched, the new rulers attained unprecedented political heights. Conquest was followed up by administrative centralization and systematic appropriation of revenue. Now, this new ruling class, however, was by no means a distinct, immutable, unilinear category. In fact, we get a lot of information about them, about this class, from Minhaj's Tabakat-e-Nasiri. Right? We find that the Shanshabani dynasty, to which Muhammad of Ghur belonged, essentially ruled over a backward niche in Afghanistan, and they had rather humble origins as pastoral chieftains. During Iltutmish's time, Genghis Khan's penetration of Transoxiana brought in highly placed nobles from Khwarizm and Ghur, some of whom were able to rebuild their careers in their new adoptive land. So India really became a landing point of nobles from all over Central Asian nobles who had been forced to leave their homeland due to different circumstances, and they began to flourish in this new-found kingdom which Muizzuddin Muhammad of Ghur had helped to establish. So, we find a diverse and stratified group of nobles and slaves from the central Islamic lands of Ghazni, Ghur, Khorasan, Khwarizm, and Afghanistan who came into India in search of security and patronage. Some of them were Tajiks who spoke the Persian language and hailed from eastern Iran. Some were Khalj, tribesmen, while others were of Turkish ethnicity. It was this conglomerate that formed the new ruling elite in northern India. With time, Indian Muslims carved out a niche for themselves within this exalted circle. Now, with the initiation of the Sultanate rule, obviously, Islam constituted another significant determinant of political and cultural change. Islamic traditions of governance had acquired a degree of permanence during the 11th and 12th centuries in the Punjab, thanks to the Ghaznavite presence. Right? So this expanded more afterwards as the Delhi Sultanate came into existence. So in terms of everyday working of the administration, an alternate framework of state was formulated vis-à-vis the existent one. The Islamic idea of sovereignty derived from Persian traditions was now offered as the principal tool of legitimacy. The Muslims brought with them new jurisprudence that primarily took off from the Hanafi school of law. The legal structure obviously underwent important changes. Particular social groups also began to play a more fundamental role in the workings of the state. Among them, the ulema or scholars took upon themselves the task of guiding certain echelons of society according to Islamic norms. Islam also took up a different dimension through mystics and itinerant preachers who represented the Sufi orders. The appeal of the mystics was certainly more pervasive, right? Their spirituality was embodied in a wide array of artistic forms like poems, songs, literature, and discourses or malfuzat, and they touched people in a major way. The popularization of Islam in the Indian subcontinent was in a great measure the work of the Sufi saints and mystics. However, we must remember that Islamic society in India was never completely homogeneous. So there was a mosaic of different sects like the Shia Ismailis, the Mapillas, the Marakkiyas, alongside the Sunnis who were high-born Arabs, Turks, or Afghanistan. So this new class began to become more and more important in the Indian subcontinent. In conclusion, we may say that in order to appropriate the resources of their newly acquired domain, the new rulers allied with the Hindu-landed elite who dominated the countryside. The Hindu intermediary class, which underwent a series of social transformations, found itself in a position of privilege above the peasantry during a major portion of the Sultanate rule. Thus, we find that a complex picture emerges. We find a Hindu intermediary class who worked as collaborators of the new regime, and they were made up of Hindus and also other religious and social groups. This new structure of governance was imposed upon a pre-Islamic traditional society steeped in custom and long-standing mores. The new rulers, in fact, seemed quite hesitant to penetrate at the micro level and supplant the prevalent social structure completely with an alternating one. So the original Indian society definitely existed, but it was superimposed with a new ruling class and certain administrative and social changes. Thank you.